In this video, we will be discussing the major philosophies or schools of thought in China during the classical era. So there's just one big question for this video, and that is, how did the three schools of Chinese thought seek to create order and harmony in China? The last time we were in China, we were discussing how the Zhou dynasty collapsed and it broke apart and it led to a series of warring states. So decentralized or localized rule became the norm in China, and this is known as the Warring States period, and it lasted from 403 BCE to 221 BCE. And all of these various local rulers had their own armies, and there was constant conflict and warfare between these different regions. And so China was in a bit of a chaotic place during the Warring States period. So it is in this period that a number of different schools of thought emerge about how do we get China out of this period of chaos. And so this is known sometimes as the 100 schools of thought period, but there's really three main schools of thinking that develop about how to restore harmony, order, and balance in Chinese society. And these schools of thought are going to be incredibly important for understanding Chinese history moving forward. So these three schools of thought are, first, legalism, second, Taoism, and third, Confucianism. So let's start with legalism. So here is a quote by a legalist philosopher named Han Fei. If rewards are high, then what the ruler wants will be quickly effected. If punishments are heavy, then what he does not want will be swiftly prevented. So what legalism was about was ensuring that the ruler established very clear laws, that everyone understood what was expected of them. In a society where there's chaos, everyone needs to understand what the law is. And so in order to do this, Han Fei said, you need to both reward, much like if you're training a dog, but also if the dog does something you don't like, let's say it pees on the couch, there are some harsh punishments. Swift public punishments that make it very clear to the rule breaker that that will not be tolerated. So legalists seek to create harmony through the establishment of clear laws, strictly enforced with harsh punishments. Now, the second school of thought is Taoism. And here's a quote from the Taoist founder Lao Tzu. Man takes his law from the earth takes it from heaven takes its law from the Tao, and the Tao means the way. The law of the Tao is being what it is. So what does Lao Tzu mean? Taoism is a very complex philosophy. The best way for me to summarize it is in a story, and it involves a farmer who once had the most beautiful prized horse in China, and that horse one day ran away. And his neighbor came to his door and knocked on the door and said, I heard the terrible news. I heard that your prized horse ran away. And the farmer said, it is neither good nor bad. It is what it is. The next day, the horse returned with 6 other beautiful wild horses. And the neighbor came to the door, knocked on the door, and said, I heard the great news. I heard that your horse came back and brought other wild horses with it. And the farmer said, it is neither good nor bad. It is what it is. And then the next day, the farmer's son was out riding on one of these wild horses and fell off and broke his arm. And that night, the neighbor came to the door, knocked on the door, and said, I heard the terrible news. I heard that your son fell and broke his arm. And the farmer said, it is neither good nor bad. It is what it is. The next day, a soldier in the army showed up at the farmer's door and said, we have a conscription list and your son is required to go to war. And the farmer said, well, he's got a broken arm, so he cannot serve. And so the soldier left. That night, the neighbor came to the door and knocked on the door and said, I heard the great news that your son doesn't have to go to war. And the farmer said, It is what it is. It is neither good nor bad. So, Taoism is a philosophy that is about order and harmony and balance. And what Taoists believe is that that order and harmony and balance already exist in the world, and that ultimately the thing that people need to do is essentially do nothing, but just to go out into nature and reflect about how nature already has these various opposites in balance and harmony within it. So Taoism was founded by a man named Lao Tzu, and the story of Lao Tzu is kind of an interesting one. He was this great wise man, and he one day wanted to practice what he preached. He wanted to go out into nature. So he was leaving his town, and the guard at the gate said, "Well, before you go, you need to provide us with some of your ideas." And so Lao Tzu that night went home, wrote down all of his ideas into a book, and then the next day left on a water buffalo, and on his way out handed the book of important insights to the soldier, and that became the basis for Taoism. Now, a symbol that you oftentimes will see in Taoism that sort of is a reflection of those ideas is the yin yang, this notion of opposites living in harmony. So, as I just described, in nature, there are these things that are in balance with one another that already exist. In Taoism, the yin represents the dark side of the circle. It also represents female, night, moon, cold, and soft. The light side represents the more masculine side. It also represents day, sun, hot, and hard. So that's the yang side. Taoists believe that each of these opposites aren't mutually exclusive. So, for example, like I described in the story, something that might seem good on its face actually turns out to be bad, and vice versa. Something that might seem bad on its face might actually turn out to be good. So one of the things on my bucket list is to go to a Taoist temple in China, and here is how you get there.
It is a nice boardwalk.
So the Taoists believe in going out into nature. So here's how you approach the temple. And within the temple, as only Taoists would put, there's actually a chessboard representing the location where 1,000 years ago, according to a legend, a Taoist was able to defeat the emperor and thereby win this mountain for the Taoists. So I show you this in order to highlight the fact that the Taoists had a huge influence on Chinese architecture, poetry, and medicine. Taoist architecture is oftentimes characterized by its symmetry and its location in nature. It's very simple, it's very austere. They also had a huge influence on medicine. So, if you are aware of the practice of acupuncture, one of the purposes of acupuncture was that the Taoists believed that when you got sick, essentially your chi or your energy force was out of balance, and one of the purposes of acupuncture and also other Chinese medical practices like cupping was to rebalance your chi or your internal energy. So the school of thought you need to be most familiar with that emerged from this classical age was Confucianism. Now, Confucianists believe that harmony is achieved when everyone understands their proper place in society and plays their part. So Confucianism was based on the teachings of Confucius, a philosopher who lived in the 6th century BCE. Now, this is different than legalism. Legalists look to the laws to establish order and harmony in society. It's different than Taoism. Taoists look to nature, where order and harmony already exists. What Confucianists believe is that ultimately it's for each person to know and understand their place, to perform certain rituals, and to play their part. Confucius was a teacher, and he believed that the way that you learned your role in society was through education. Confucius identified 5 relationships in society that were critical. First, the parent-child relationship, the ruler-subject relationship, the husband and wife relationship, the older sibling and younger sibling relationship, and then the friend to friend. Now, for the first four of these relationships, Confucius asserted that these were hierarchical relationships, meaning the parent, the ruler, the husband, and the older sibling were in a position of power and dominance relative to the child, the subject, the wife, and the younger sibling. The friend to friend relationship is not hierarchical. When you are dealing with someone who is of a higher position than you owe them certain obligations, certain rituals. You must be obedient and respectful in Confucianism and show proper deference to your superior. For those who are in the superior position, you can't abuse your position of power. In fact, what Confucius would say is the exact opposite. The superior must set a moral example, must demonstrate the proper way to behave in certain situations. So, for example, in the case of the ruler-subject relationship, the subject has to show proper deference and respect to the ruler, but the ruler can't just abuse his power. The ruler has to be benevolent in order to maintain power in the relationship. So, the most important of all of these relationships for purpose of Confucianism is the parent-child relationship. And at the heart of the parent-child relationship is this concept called filial piety, which is respect or obedience that's shown by a child towards their parent. So in Chinese culture, it's incredibly important for children to show deference to their parents. So important that in fact they have a law in China that requires family members who live apart from the elderly to frequently visit or send greetings to the elderly. I show this clip in class of a older grandma who is suing her son for not visiting her enough. So as a result of watching this video, you should be able to answer this big question. How did the three schools of Chinese thought seek to create order and harmony in China? You should again be able to identify that for legalists, they look to laws that are clearly set out with harsh punishments. For Taoists, they look to the balance and harmony that already exist within nature. For Confucianists, they stress knowing your proper place in society as defined by these five relationships, many of which are hierarchical in nature, and that you need to perform your proper rituals in a humane manner and show proper deference and respect if you're the inferior, and set a good example if you are the superior. As always, thanks for watching.